This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned to the break as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's money hack about talking with the children and young adults in your life about money. For more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU. This week on the GeekWire podcast, an inside look at Amazon's classic process for strategic thinking and decision-making with a former Amazon product and technology director who's written a new book about the documents used by the company to determine its direction. What can others learn from its approach? Plus, we break down this pivotal moment in Amazon's history as employees return to the office 5 days a week, and we check in on the state of the Seattle startup world. That's all coming up this week on the GeekWire podcast. Welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. We're coming to you from Seattle, where we get to report each day on what's happening around us in business, technology, and innovation. What happens here matters everywhere, and every week on this show, we get to talk about some of the most interesting stories and trends in the news. I'm pleased to be joined this week at the GeekWire offices by Marcelo Cuchi. He is a longtime Seattle area entrepreneur, a veteran of Microsoft and Amazon, startup community organizer, and a new author. His new book is called The PRFAQ Framework, Adapting Amazon's Innovation Framework to Work for You. Marcelo, it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Todd. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about this book. It's really an effort by you to adopt the things that you learned inside Amazon about their famous working backwards formula and take it and apply it to other areas, because it's not something that can really just be taken from Amazon, plucked out of there and applied elsewhere. It needs some adaptation. But first, just so people have a sense for your background, how did you end up at Amazon? Give us a little bit of your tech and entrepreneurial story.
Sure. I've worked at Microsoft for almost 7 years. This was a time where innovation was slowing down at Microsoft. So I always felt the need to do more and innovate. So I left and I became a founder, entrepreneur here in Seattle for almost 20 years. That's what I did. I was a founder in many startups and local companies and working in many different startups in Seattle and in London as well until I went back here.
So how then did you end up at Amazon?
Amazon reached out to me. This was during the, I don't know what we call this new tech boom that existed, in 2021, 2022, because they were starting a new project. And I had some domain expertise in the area that they were starting that project. So they asked me to join. I did the interview, I did everything, and then I ended up as a director of product and technology at Amazon, leading this new project. And it was a pretty large organization at Amazon. Everything that Amazon does is in large scale. And we had more than 100 people, 100 software engineers, product managers, UX designers working on this initiative. So that is how I ended up at Amazon.
So do you remember when you were introduced to the whole notion of what Amazon calls the PRFAQ? And just for folks who have not followed this, it's a press release, frequently asked questions document. It's typically 6 pages, and it's really a fundamental part of Amazon, which we can get into here. But do you remember the moment when you were introduced to this whole idea?
Yeah, absolutely. On my first week at Amazon, I was invited to a meeting, and it was a bunch of directors and VPs, and one of these documents was presented, right? And this was a time that we were working remotely. There weren't people going to the office because it was still the tail end of COVID. And they shared the document online with everyone, and everyone was expected to read silent for 20 minutes.
Even though you were remote?
Even though you're remote. So you were in a Chime meeting, which is the Amazon equivalent of Zoom, and you're reading this document, and everyone has their camera turned off. And as people read the document and are ready to start discussing, they start turning their camera on.
Oh.
So that's a signal that we are ready to have a conversation.
Interesting. Okay, I wondered how that worked, but that's sort of a secondary point. So you were in this meeting in the Chime. What did you think of the process at first? Did it feel natural to you to sit there silently in a group meeting and read a document?
it does not feel natural the first time you do this or the first few times you do that. It feels kind of strange being in a meeting and everyone being silent, even though you are remote. But then you start to understand the process. You observe how people do it and how the comments flow and how they incorporate that back into the document, right? So one of the mistakes that people make or assumptions that people make about PRFAQ is that it's a very static document. And it's not. It is a document meant to provoke conversation, right? So sometimes there are statements there that make people uncomfortable because they say, well, this is not possible or this is not true. And then you correct and you update the document and you continue the conversation, right? So from meeting to meeting, the document becomes better and better because more opinions are incorporated into that document and process. So it's a very interesting way to discover what you don't know.
And my understanding is that it's a vision of the future in a lot of ways. You're writing a press release that's imagining the launch of this product or initiative or project that you're working on, and you're writing a set of frequently asked questions for internal audiences and also for these imaginary or prospective customers. So it's something that's imagining the future, and then you work backwards from there. Is that effectively what a PRFAQ is?
That's right. There are three parts to a PRFAQ, right? You have the press release, which looks like a press release, but is not intended to be a press release. You're never going to send that to the press, but it reads just like a press release, like as you are launching a new product, a new service, or a new business. Then you have the customer FAQ, which is like, what if the customer were asking a question that they didn't get from the press release or they are curious about, right? Like, what is the price? What do I need to do? Like, how do I get started? Those are like the customer FAQs. You impersonate the customers and you write those FAQs as if, the product was already existed. But of course, you're proposing a product, so it doesn't exist yet. And the third part of a PRFAQ is the internal FAQs, right? So that is directed at the team. And you might talk about the feasibility, you might talk about the viability, you might talk about the value that you're delivering or projections or timelines or like what you're going to need to make this happen and like what is the strategic value for the organization or for the team. So that's how, you bring together a PRFAQ.
So in your experience inside Amazon, what was the value of this process? Because it really is a process. It's not just a document, as you're saying.
That's right.
Like, what was the value that you saw? And after all this experience that you'd had at Microsoft and all the PowerPoints that I'm sure you sat through, like, what made you go, wow, this is something different and useful?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest values that the PRFAQ brings is not only the collaboration among people that understand what they are talking about, because you're going to ask someone in finance about the financial aspect. You're going to ask someone about UX, who are a UX expert. So that's very important. There is a depth to the document, which is different than PowerPoint. PowerPoints tend to be shallow, tend to be bullet point, tend to be hand wavy at how you're going to get things done, or like, what is the sum of these numbers? On a PRFAQ, like you see the real meat of it, right? It's very hard to not go deep and to think critically about what you're writing about, right? You want something that is coherent. And on PowerPoint, you don't necessarily need coherence to make a show.
I have to tell you, just as my own little personal anecdote here, I've written a PRFAQ for an Amazon executive. And actually, I want to tell you about that when we come back. Let's take a break. That's a good teaser. You're listening to GeekWire, and we'll be right back with Marcelo Cuchi, the author of the PRFAQ Framework. This GeekWire podcast is brought to you by BECU. Stay tuned as Brian Westbrook interviews BECU's Stacy Black for today's Money Hack about talking with the children and young adults in your life about money. And for more money hacks, check out geekwire.com/BECU.
Why is it important to talk to children and young adults about their financial goals? I'm Brian Westbrook. In Money Hacks presented by BECU, we'll talk about what parents can do to help educate their children. And Stacy Black is the lead financial educator for BECU. What tips would you have for parents?
I would say start early, and it's never early enough. The sooner we get started, the more we're going to position our children for bright financial futures. So having those conversations, being open, honest, just talking through everyday spending and finances with our kids is important.
It's important for them to know that just because you can walk up to an ATM, that doesn't mean there's an unlimited supply of cash.
Yep. It's not free money, which I thought it was.
Ryan, I'm learning a lot. Well, you can learn a lot more on this episode of Money Hacks. Check out geekwire.com/BECU. I'm Brian Westbrook.
Listen to the full interview and find more episodes of Money Hacks at geekwire.com/BECU and find more information at becu.org. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. Our guest this week is Marcelo Cuchi, longtime Seattle area entrepreneur and technologist, startup community organizer, who is the author of the new book, The PR FAQ Framework. So this is my own little story, Marcelo. I was really lobbying to get Jeff Wilke, who was then Amazon's consumer CEO, to speak at the GeekWire Summit back pre-COVID, 2018, 2019. So my whole idea was, well, I'll do the Amazon thing. I wrote a 6-pager, a PR FAQ with a press release at the beginning, imagining his successful appearance at the GeekWire Summit with all sorts of FAQs. And it was a gimmick. And I actually put it online afterward. And I got just raked over the coals for the lack of rigor in my thinking by some of the Amazon folks who read it. And it seems like that's part of the process. And I will say it was successful. He agreed to come and speak at the summit, and we passed out the PR FAQ to the audience beforehand. My joke was, we're not going to require you to sit in silence for 20 minutes on this. At any rate, I was really struck by the criticism that I received. I mean, it's good. It's great. It was very constructive. Like, you didn't go into enough depth in this part of the PR FAQ. And it seems like that's just part of Amazon's culture, and it comes through in this PR FAQ process.
That's right. Amazon takes writing very seriously, and it's not a type of writing that you can learn just by doing it. There is very particular ways that you write things so that you can convey the message clearly, right? So an important part of the PR FAQ is to be precise in your language. So every time you use adjectives or use words that are vague, it's not seen well. Amazon has a list of words that should never appear in a PR FAQ.
Oh, really? Can you think of any examples of one?
Using words like many and some tend to be frowned upon. Like, you can use those words, right? But there are other words there. It's not good. They call like weasel words, right? And on the book, I list a few of these words that you can read and find. For example, using words like choice and freedom and other things. This is not necessarily the Amazon list, but it's my list.
Yep.
That like, you're not conveying something with precision when you use those words, right? And in a business setting, it's really hard to make decisions if you don't understand what I'm telling you or how you're reading what I wrote, right? So that's the important aspect of a PR FAQ.
I can see where if you read enough of these, you would just have this radar where you would recognize a word and say, okay, that is a cheat for the lack of research that this particular product team or executive might have failed to do, and is using a word like many instead of 1.56 million.
That's right. That's exactly right. Like having numbers that actually are accurate and precise is very valuable in a PR FAQ. And if you don't have the numbers, the expectation is you go find it, right? You just don't say like many users use this product. You actually go try to find how many users actually use that product.
Okay, so this method is tried and true inside Amazon. I mean, this is as much a part of the culture as the phrase day one, if I understand it correctly. You went and looked at this, and I think you asked yourself, could this be applied elsewhere? And the initial feedback you got from other people was, no, this can't just be taken from Amazon and applied directly as it works inside Amazon to startups, for example. Why not?
So let me roll back a little bit. While I was at Amazon, I was thinking, why aren't PR FAQ widely adopted, right? By founders, by product managers, by business leaders everywhere. Because I really thought it was a great tool I think it is a great tool to discuss strategy and to discuss vision and to find the truth in a proposal, right? And to chase an opportunity. So when I left Amazon, I talked with a bunch of folks who have left Amazon and joined other companies or founded their own companies to understand which aspects of the Amazon, peculiar ways they brought with them, and what worked and what didn't work. And what I learned is a lot of people try to do PRFAQ, but they found resistance because when the other people don't understand how to write one, how to read one, or how to use one, they couldn't get traction with that. So what I felt the biggest problem is like the other people didn't have a resource to learn about it. So it gave me the conviction that writing a book would help, not necessarily with the people writing a PRFAQ, but the other people participating in the collaboration of a PRFAQ to understand what this is, how to use it, and how to leverage to make decisions, important business decisions.
Does the process itself need to change when you apply it someplace other than Amazon?
That's where I put the most effort in the book. So at Amazon, the process is tribal knowledge. It's not like Amazon trains you on how to write a PRFAQ and how to read a PRFAQ and how to provide feedback on a PRFAQ. People know, right? And it's all there. So when I was writing the book and I was thinking like, what is this book going to be about? Like, it's just talking about the framework and the document and the artifact. That's not enough because people are going to look at this and they're not going to know how to get there. Right? So a huge portion of the book, the majority of the book actually is dedicated to the method around creating one and using the PRFAQ to find the information that you need to make a business decision.
I can imagine that there are a lot of questions that come up about artificial intelligence and the PRFAQ. And reading what you've written about AI and your own usage of it, for example, in the book, which is you did not use it to write the book, it made me realize that there's some real takeaways here in terms of the process of thinking and writing and the value of that and the way that AI can often be a shortcut. And so I'm wondering, even if during your time at Amazon, there were prohibitions on the use of AI that you saw in terms of using generative AI to create language that ended up in a PRFAQ? Like, what did you see in terms of how they approached that?
Yeah, no.
No.
That didn't happen. But let's talk about AI.
Yeah.
And I think generative AI is great. It has helped me in so many ways and so many aspects of my life, including research for the book. I use generative AI to answer questions about products that I use that is much faster than just going to Google and trying to figure out by myself or watching a 5-minute YouTube video just to find that one menu that you're looking for. So generative AI is fantastic. The problem with generative AI is that it takes away from your thinking, right? Like you want to apply thinking while you're writing. And I'm not sure I'm the most qualified person to write about this, but I read lots of research about the power of writing as a method to develop reason. And when AI is doing the writing for you, then you're not doing the reasoning and the thinking. And that doesn't help you find the truth in an opportunity or a product or a business, right? It might actually be steering you towards some average outcome that not necessarily is going to work for you. So I'm very cautious about people using AI to write something they need to think through, right? It's okay if you're just going to write some small amount of copy or a social media post that doesn't require deep thinking, it doesn't require critical thinking, that's totally fine. But if you really want to think about a problem and a solution and a proposal, you probably should be doing the writing yourself. It's fine to use AI to help with grammar and conciseness and clarity and some of that, and to check your writing as well to see if you're missing a point in your logic. But you want to avoid to use AI to do the thinking.
That really comes through in this whole process. And there was a great essay that Ted Chiang, the science fiction author, wrote just about this whole thing as it relates to art and the fact that the art is in the process and it's in what the artist does to come up with the output. It's not the output itself as much as it is the thing that the artist goes through. And in many ways, you're talking about the same thing here.
That's right. That's right. I think the biggest value in the PRFAQ is not the document itself. It's the process of creating the document and everyone that gets involved in that. So in the book, I mentioned that in one portions of the book that when a PRFAQ is done, the document has no value anymore because you already did what you need to do. You already thought through everything that you need to think through. You already collaborated with everyone that you need to collaborate with. And when you call the document the final version, it kind of loses its value because like the thought process was already done. I mean, it still has value for new employees and for other people that are going to collaborate with you. But like for the team that are going to execute the project, once the PRFAQ is complete, the value has been extracted.
It's really interesting you say that. Some of the Amazon teams I've covered, teams that have gone on to do, significant things. I'm thinking like EC2, within Amazon Web Services, the whole idea of elastic cloud compute and all that. In some of the cases when I've been interviewing them, they've offered to show me the original PRFAQ that they came up with. And to your point, it's almost like it belongs in a museum. It's an example of a moment in time and a process that they went through in the past. But in terms of the actual value that it still has, it's more of a historic artifact than it is a relevant document for today.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. So how applicable is this to the outside world then? I mean, you've written a book that is basically based on this premise. After you've gone through this process, I mean, maybe it's a dumb question, but do you recommend that startups jump in and try to use the PRFAQ framework, not only the book, but the actual framework in their own businesses?
Yeah, I've been doing writing as a system of thinking for a long time. Right. And I think it works really well for me. And I think it works well for lots of other people. And I know lots of founders and entrepreneurs and very successful product leaders who also do the same thing. So I don't think I'm unique on that. Right. I think the PRFAQ gives me a little bit more structure for me to be faster. Actually, this weekend I wrote a PRFAQ for a new project that I'm considering doing. Oh. And it took me about 8 hours to write. I'm familiar with the process, but it gives me the guardrails to be faster at that and just say, like, what am I missing here? Like, what is important on this project? Like, what is going to make this viable or not viable? And it helps you question, if you're making the right decision or not. So if you are a very early stage founder and like it's you and your co-founder, you're deciding if you're going to do this business or not, or even decide which business you're going to do, writing a PRFAQ is going to bring the questions that you should be figuring out the answers for, right? Even though it might not be easy, it might point you in the right direction to say, like, this is what is the most important thing for us to figure out next. So a PRFAQ is very valuable in that way, right? And if you cannot tell a story to yourself, it's going to be really hard to tell a story to your customer, to an investor, or to a potential employee to join your organization.
This is great. So with you here, I can't help but ask you about some current topics related to Amazon and maybe a little Microsoft and startups. So let's do that when we come back. You're listening to GeekWire, and we'll be right back. It's Todd Bishop, and I wanted to tell you about a favorite podcast of mine. It's called Booming, and it's a show that has opened my eyes to a whole range of things, like what's really happening when I scan a digital coupon at the grocery store, and how robots are changing the construction of buildings in downtown Seattle, among many other topics. Booming is a podcast from KUOW Public Radio in Seattle. It's about the economic forces shaping our lives in the Pacific Northwest. It's co-hosted by reporters Joshua McNichols and Monica Nicholsberg. That's a familiar name and voice to longtime GeekWire readers and listeners. They answer questions that listeners are wondering about, like, why are sports tickets so expensive? Or how hard should you actually work at work? Plus, every episode ends with a game. That's Booming from KUOW Public Radio. Find episodes on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop. I'm here this week with Marcelo Cuchi. His new book is the PRFAQ Framework, and you can find a link to it in the show notes on this podcast, and we'll also link to it from GeekWire and the related article there. So, Marcelo, it's such an interesting time in the broader startup world because of AI in part, but we've also seen this overall decline in angel and venture funding. And I'm just curious, especially given your experience in the past with Seattle 2.0 and with startups that you've run, what are you seeing these days in the Pacific Northwest startup community and in Seattle in particular?
Yeah, we came out from a high just a couple of years ago. Like, if you've been following this industry, just 2 years ago, like, startups were getting crazy amount of funding. There were lots of startups, lots of people doing things. Big companies were hiring insane amount of software engineers. Salaries went through the roof. And then suddenly we had this change of heart with inflation, the post-COVID era, the end of the zero interest era, and things cooled down really fast, right? So it almost felt like they overreacted to all these changes. I think right now we are in a low, and a steady low, and things are going to start to pick up again, both in the employment market, but also in the startup world and investment world. I think there was a lot of confusion about Gen AI and how effective it is. So a lot of people held back on certain types of investments. Of course, startups that were like knee deep on AI got investments, and some of them are doing great. Some of them are doing not so great, but every other startup's kind of dried out right now and is struggling to raise funds. But that's going to change as things stabilize in that world.
It's interesting. Last year, we talked a lot about Techstars Seattle and the whole notion of whether there were enough resources going forward in the community. And I know this is an area you've focused on a lot generally in terms of things like meetups and startup advising. And this is a world that you're very plugged into. If you could do one thing, and maybe this is the subject of the PRFAQ you were working on for yourself, but like if you could do something for the Seattle startup community, snap your fingers and change something or do something, is there anything that comes to mind that is a real need right now?
I think so. I think we don't have enough people tinkering with startup ideas. And this could be people like that left their job and are full-time thinking about a startup or like planning their startup, or people that are working at Microsoft or Amazon or Google and they are just spending their nights and weekends like trying something. We don't have enough support for them. We don't have enough events for them. We don't make it easy for them to connect with the right people that can tell them where to go, where not to go, how to do, how not to do certain things. I think we could do a lot more, but that doesn't happen right now.
It's interesting because there was this groundswell of that in, the late teens, 2018, 2019. And then, of course, we hit 2020 and it feels like COVID just kind of reset everything in a lot of ways. And so much of that hasn't come back. And, of course, we like to think at GeekWire that we can play some sort of role in that. And it's hard sometimes to find that place to do that. And at the same time, events are different. A lot of service providers are doing events of their own. And this is getting into a little bit of navel gazing here, but it's saturated, but in a different way. It's a different world right now.
It is. But I think we don't, it's my personal opinion really, I don't think we have enough customer-focused events using Amazon language, like customer-obsessed events for founders, right? So a lot of the events that we have are optimized for sponsors or to other stakeholders that are not, the people that are going to build the startups, or they are optimized for investors as well. And I noticed this, and that's a turnoff for a lot of potential founders or existing founders. So there's not a lot of that happening right now, and we could use more of it.
Okay, on another topic, you spent years at Microsoft. You spent time at Amazon as well. I'd like to ask you about Amazon first. I mean, this is a company that is in many ways at a crossroads, and my own take on this is there's been so much focus on the return to office for 5 days a week. And lost in that discussion sometimes is that memo that Andy Jassy wrote, the CEO of Amazon wrote, that introduced the return to office 5 days a week last year. And my read on that memo was Amazon had lost the magic. And this was not the phrase he used, but that the formula that Amazon had used to become the Amazon that it is today, between remote work and the pandemic and an explosion of middle managers, had kind of been diffused and lost. And to me, the company seems like it's at a crossroads. And I don't mean to answer the question here, but I'm curious, like, what is your take on where this company is, what it needs to do to get the mojo back, if you accept my premise? Like, what is your overall take on Amazon these days?
I think that's not only happening at Amazon, but every one of the major tech companies is going through something similar. And if you think about it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Microsoft was going through that as well, right? Microsoft put itself in a very good position to be prepared for the AI wave that is coming right now. You can say that was luck, that was preparation.
It was OpenAI.
Yeah, and Microsoft invested in OpenAI early on, so that was very valuable, right? But if you think about Meta, and you think about Google, and you think about Amazon, and even Apple, there is similar language being used across all these organizations, right? Because these organizations are so massive that when they have $1 billion idea, it means nothing. Right. So the expectation of everyone is like, show me the next $10 billion business, the next $100 billion business. And it's really hard to create those. So yes, I think Amazon is going through a phase, and the transition from Bezos to Andy and everything that is happening with post-COVID and RTO, it's causing a lot of stir. The real question is like, what is Amazon going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And it's going to develop a new culture. Some of the elements that exist today are going to stay. Some are going to evolve. The same thing happened with Satya. Like, Satya has been on a 10-year journey to redefine the culture at Microsoft. Right? And they change with AGR policies, they change how they do innovation, the technology that they use, they embrace open source. They started embracing before Satya, but like a lot more during the Satya era. So Amazon is going to do something similar. I think it's hard to predict exactly how that's going to be, but it's going to be Andy's hand on this.
Do you think it was the right decision to bring people back to the office 5 days a week?
Yeah, you're putting me on the spot here, Todd. I think people do more together when they are co-located. I think individual productivity is higher when you have an opportunity to focus and not be disturbed. So that can be from the office or from home. But business is a team sport. Business is not an individual sport. So understanding when it's valuable to have people in the same place working together, it's very important.
I'm just waiting for the Star Trek transporter, because there are times when I'll be here in the office and I'll be like, I don't want to have a phone call or a Slack message. I just wish that person was sitting next to me for 10 minutes and then they were gone. So it's a challenge, and there's been so many upsides to remote work, and there's been so many downsides, and it's just, I can see where it would just be this real dilemma for big companies like Amazon.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, at an individual level, it's really hard because some people have to take care of a loved one or a pet, or they made arrangements to live in a certain area that makes it very difficult to go to the office 5 days a week. And at the same time, organizations sometimes need you to collaborate with other people, particularly if you have like junior people on your team.
Yes.
Like, how do they learn? How do they observe you using a computer? Or like you go to a whiteboard and very quickly draw to them something of how something works. Like, it's so hard to do that remotely. In the beginning of COVID, there were lots of new tools that came up to do like remote whiteboards and collaboration tools, but like they never reach the point that you expected to simulate what you get on a face-to-face meeting.
It strikes me that people who listen to what I just said might say, well, why doesn't he just jump into a Zoom or something? And for some reason, I haven't developed that quick twitch, Slack huddle kind of thing. It's just not, maybe I'm too old, but it's not something that's been just intuitive or natural to me to jump on a 10-minute impromptu ad hoc video call with somebody. But that's just me. So you've got this new book out, the PRFAQ Framework, and I know really it's a full-time job getting the word out about your book and making sure that it reaches the right market and the right readers. But beyond that, where are you headed? Can you give us a hint for what might be next for you in the next year or two or a little bit more?
Yeah, so we're in the age of AI. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about AI, using AI, and figuring out how to do. One of the areas that I'm very interested in how you can use AI to help you write in the right way.
Huh.
Right. So right now I see two types of AI tools. One is the helps you with grammar and write your words better. Another type of AI tool for writers is Write for You. And I think neither are the right ones, right? There's something in between that's going to help you think through writing. And I haven't seen any tool like that yet. And I'm very interested in that space right now.
Interesting. Well, that resonates with me. I talk about it a lot at GeekWire because over the last 2 years, one of the questions has been, how do we incorporate this into our own work? And my big thing has been, over the past few months at least, I've come to the realization that it's about the process more than it is about the product. In other words, to your point earlier, I love using, just as an example, Notebook LM from Google, and I'll put tons of resources into that and then ask it questions that inform what I write. I'm not asking it to write for me, but I'm asking it, for example, when did this happen? When did this startup do this? Just based on the knowledge base that I'm creating and the citations that it's giving me into that information. So I think that sounds really cool to find someplace in between, hey, write this for me or check my grammar. And it sounds like you might have another startup in you. Am I on the right track?
Maybe. Yeah, that's an area that I'm exploring right now.
So Marcelo, I know that you're a voracious reader and you love listening to podcasts, as long as they're long enough to cover the length of your runs. Are there any books, other books or podcasts that people might not have heard of that you'd recommend for folks out there who are listening?
I don't know if people haven't heard about, but I'm sure, many of your listeners know, like I'm obsessed with the Acquired FM podcast.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I listen to all of them. I didn't know I could be fascinated by the story of IKEA or Costco or Walmart, but I am. And I feel like if you are a business leader, an executive, a founder, or an investor, and you're not leveraging that as a resource, you're missing out.
The thing I love about that podcast, and they don't need our endorsement by any means. I mean, Ben Gilbert and David Rosenthal have somehow cracked the code to a huge audience, but the fact that it demonstrates the value, the enduring value of learning from what businesses have done over the years. And in this world that we're in right now, so much is temporary and fleeting and notifications fly by. And to me, that podcast is an example of the larger lesson of deep research, true understanding, and then applying those lessons in abstract ways and specific ways to what you're doing today. So I'm right there with you on Acquired.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah. Marcelo, this has been great. Thank you so much for coming in. And for folks who are intrigued by all of this, I highly recommend the book. I'm in the middle of it right now, the PRFAQ Framework, and you can find it on Amazon. And where else can folks find it?
On www.theprfaq.com.
Theprfaq.com is another great place to go. So thank you very much, Marcelo.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Marcelo Cuchi has also created a giveaway contest for GeekWire readers and listeners. See the show notes or the post on GeekWire for a link to the page where you can enter for a chance to win a copy of the PRFAQ framework. Thanks for listening, everybody. Curt Milton edited and produced this episode. Until next time, I'm Todd Bishop. We'll be back soon with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.